Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just put out a update a little bit later. Normally we expect these updates on Thursdays, but this one came out on Friday. No matter, this update has some relatively minor changes. They've been kind of going with this light touch on the balance changes for the past few weeks. I presume in build up towards Season 1, which we know should be coming by the end of February. So I would imagine for the next couple weeks here, we're probably going to have these really small fixes until we get, presumably we should be getting Enno, the new Underlord, soon. I think they said that was supposed to come out before Season 1 or maybe with Season 1. It was a little ambiguous and I'm not sure if their plans are still the same. But I would imagine just we get these kind of light balance changes between now and the time that Enno comes out, at which point, of course, so much stuff changes, and then Season 1 will come up with another big amount of changes. So we're kind of on slow and steady mode here, but I do think the balance changes this week are pretty good. Let's hop right into them. First off, there's just some general bug fixes. Nothing here that's really going to be changing your game, just fixing some annoying issues that occasionally popped up. Nothing major though. Hero changes in Anessix, the damage support version of Anessix, who was probably one of the weaker Underlords, has gotten slightly buffed. Her enthrall duration is now 6 seconds instead of 5, giving you just that 1 extra second to try to kill that target. And the end of medicine attack damage bonus has been slightly increased. So this is actually rather substantial of a buff. It doesn't seem like that, but it essentially says your board used to have plus 30% bonus damage, now it's 35%. So like I imagine if there was a buff like on Assassins that said they had a 30% chance of critting up to 35% chance of critting, that's going to feel like a pretty impactful buff. And this is kind of the same. Of course, it's not Assassin specific, it's Underlord specific, and it's not a crit chance. But if you saw this kind of a change on an alliance, for instance, I would feel like, hey, that's a decent sized buff. Maybe that alliance is much more viable, in addition to the change on Enthrall. And I've kind of been to the opinion that Enthrall is a better ability than the Summon Golem if you succeed in killing the enthralled target. If you don't succeed in killing the enthralled target, it's obviously worse because the Golem is always going to get its value. But if you do get the Enthrall kill, I think Enthrall is actually really powerful. And this overall may move damage support in Essex up quite a bit in my estimation. I may be much more inclined to pick her in a lot of different builds now. Also, high damage dealer Hobgen, who's also slightly underperforming other than in Mages, where he was already like the default Underlord of choice, has gotten slight buffs on his Implosion and Friendly Fire. Implosion has been slightly buffed at all stages of the game, up from 560 initially to 600, and at the end of the game, from 1500 to 1600, and his Friendly Fire, the dropping bombs everywhere on the board, is roughly the same in the early game, but then getting slightly buffed as the game goes on, and then it caps out from 500 damage up to 600 damage now by the end of the game. So this is a decent sized buff, not just to the high damage Hobgen, but to mages particularly, because all of this is magic damage, and he was most commonly played in mage builds. So now if you are playing mages, he is just quite a bit better, and your mage builds should benefit from that, which I'm a little afraid of because I do think mages are still pretty strong, but they weren't the best composition. But maybe this, if you do get this, it might put them up to be a very, very top tier kind of build. Onto the hero changes, Batrider. This is kind of like a bug fix here, but it's actually really a nerf, because what used to happen with Batrider is that Radiance and Orb of Venom would trigger the sticky napalm damage, making Orb of Venom just like an insanely powerful item on Batrider. If you picked up an early 2-star Batrider, you really wanted to grab an Orb of Venom for it, because every time that Orb of Venom dealt 1 damage per second, it would also trigger your sticky napalm stacks, which made just the whole combo of those two deal an absurd amount of damage to whoever you had the Orb of Venom trigger on. Obviously, Radiance is a much rarer item, so I didn't get to really interact with that, but of course that would be insanely strong because you're hitting napalm on everybody. So that has been fixed, and in exchange they did this, which is a weird change. I didn't even know there was a minimum damage required for sticky napalm to proc. But I guess this would sometimes come up if a 1-star Batrider is attacking a heavily armored target or a damage-reduced target, like a knight or something like that, or a warrior with chainmail. So I honestly didn't know that was a thing. But now Sticky Napalm will always trigger on your attack as long as you deal at least 5 damage, which should be every single attack. That's just a weird change that is essentially a nerf to Batrider at the end of the day, if you were taking advantage of this. In most cases, if you weren't going to use Orb of Venom or Radiance, he's still exactly as strong as he used to be, and he's still a good early game unit, but this particular combo is now no longer viable. All right, on to Dragon Knight, who was one of the best units in the game, even after its recent nerf. So it got nerfed again. The maximum health got a very slight 50 damage or 50 HP reduction at 1 star, and then spread that out or carry that through. Where 50, 100, 200 at each star level. The attack damage has been nerfed slightly from 50 minimum to 45, 60 down to 50. So essentially a 5 damage nerf and then 10, 40. I guess if you get 3-star Dragon Knight, it's still going to be insane, but it is a slight nerf. And Breath of Fire has been nerfed at 2-star and 3-star, rather dramatically at 3-star, and also gives less attack damage reduction to the enemy at 2 and 3-star. So really, this is a big power down on 2-star Dragon Knight, and I think that's definitely justified because it was way too easy in a lot of different compositions to just say, oh, I'll just play Dragon Knight and Viper, just with no other support, no other synergies, no assassins, no knights, barely any humans, and it was too strong and too efficient of a carry that just fit into every kind of composition. So seeing both Viper and Dragon Knight kind of nerfed over the recent patches makes a lot of sense, and hopefully it'll encourage players to go a little bit more into the carry that is naturally built into their build, whether that be if you're playing like Warriors or something, you want to go with more Juggernauts and Slarders or Troll Warlords rather than just always relying on, I'm just going to throw in Dragon Knight into every build for every reason, because that makes the game a little too homogenous. Too many builds wanted Dragon Knight, and I don't think that was healthy for the game. All right, on to Gyrocopter, another very powerful ace where throwing in Gyrocopter and Sniper was just a very common into a lot of situations for the Deadeye bonus and the very powerful Deadeye ace effect. Of course, Gyrocopter and Sniper being great units on their own. So we see Gyrocopter got a rather substantial attack damage nerf by about 10 damage at 1 star. And I'm highlighting the 1 star because you often are going to just play your 1-star Gyrocopter as soon as you get it. But then, of course, 20 damage at 2-star. And actually, it's not even 20 damage because it goes from, what is it, essentially 155 here down to 140, so only 15 damage nerf at 2-star. Okay, so it's a little bit weird, but still, it's a nerf to his attack damage, and since he has such a high attack speed, that is a substantial nerf to his DPS. And the pierce damage has been reduced as well from the Deadeye ace effect. So this is going to be about a 15% damage reduction, assuming you're getting the pierces off every time, or sorry, a 12.5% because you'd have your normal auto attack damage and your auto attack would pierce through, dealing the same amount of damage. So essentially, you were double damaging when you could pierce. Now you're going to do 1.75 or 175% instead of 200% damage. So it's a small nerf, but that's not even assuming you're piercing all the time. So I think this just kind of brings Gyrocopter a bit more in line. He still does a ton of damage on his own with his call down ability if it hits big targets, big clumped up opponents. So I'm not going to shy away from playing Gyrocopter in any build that I wanted to play him before just because of this nerf. I think you still play him. He's just a tad weaker, but you're still going to play him just the same. So I wouldn't even worry too much about this other than know that he'll be a little bit weaker overall. Still a good unit, still a good strategy. IO bug fixed on relocate, nothing really to note there, just now refresh orb works and relocates. That's not going to change your plays at all. Legion Commander, no, they nerfed my Legion Commander. Small nerf, it's a small nerf, don't worry, she's still pretty good. So at 3-star, which was very easy to achieve with the Druid bonus, she got a rather substantial attack damage nerf. So she's going to have about 20-ish 24 base damage reduction. Went from between 180 and 228 down to between 160 and 200. So it's about a 24 damage reduction overall, taking the average there. Quick math, so please don't fact check me on that. So at 2-star, which I've often had games where just Legion Commander at 2-star just carries the game. Obviously, you do want to get up to 3-star if possible, but really, if she's hitting for so much and has so many other multipliers and increases, a 20 damage difference is not the end of the world. It should hurt her a bit in the early game if you do manage to get her up to 2 or 3-star early with the Druid bonus. It does kind of reduce her ability to get those real early kills, but by the time you get to the late game, she should be doing so much that it doesn't really matter. However, she does get a little bit less damage from duels at 2 and 3-star. Instead of 5, 10, 15 damage, it's 5, 8, 12 damage. So once again, this is just going to be a little bit of a nuisance. I still think if you have a good build with her, with demons and with lots of other alliances, and you are consistently winning duels, she's still going to be an absolute force and can carry your game. But if you... but she will just be a little bit weaker trying to get to that point, which I think is fair. If you're going to kind of have this unit that can be built into a huge juggernaut, like Legion Commander could, it's fair to say it's going to be a struggle to get there. You see that in actual Dota a lot with Anti-Mage and Morphling and other kinds of like hyper late game carries, that it takes a while to get them online. And if it... once you get there, the payoff can still be pretty good, but they're just going to have a little bit of a rougher time getting to that point. And so I think that's fair on Legion Commander. She's still probably pretty good. I personally think she was the best strategy in the current meta with Legion Commander plus Bloodbounds and Demons. But with this change, I still think she's pretty good. I'm not sure if she's still the absolute best strategy. All right, moving on to Slark. Here has got a slight buff. His attack damage has been increased by about 10 at 1 star, and his essence shift is slightly more effective at starting at 2 star, or rather, the attack gain is increased at 2 star, and then the attack speed gain is increased at every level, or 1 and 2 star, not at 3 star. I've never really seen a 3-star Slark since the most recent patch, since now he's a tier 4 unit. But this is fair. Slark was a little bit underwhelming for a tier 4 unit. He was essentially feeling like a tier 3 unit just shoved into tier 4. And these kind of buffs should help him to get a little bit scarier whenever he does get going. But he's still going to be very squishy. He still has very low HP. And so he really wants like Mask of Madness or another kind of tanky resilience item to keep him alive long enough to stack up all of these stacks. So Mask of Madness is still the best item for him, but I would put a little bit higher priority on him, and I think this is a buff to Assassins in the mid to late game as well. So Assassins should be ever so slightly stronger with this Slark buff. Sven has also been changed a little bit. His maximum mana used to be 200. It used to take a while for him to cast. It took 200 mana game, which just took forever. Now it only costs 150. So he should get off his God Strength, which is his like big supercharge ability, and he then becomes a very potent carry a few seconds earlier into the fight, a few auto attacks faster, and that's really good news, especially for Knights builds, because with the slight nerf to Batrider from before, or rather bug fix nerf, they are going to be lacking damage output, and Knights still probably generally lack damage output, but when Sven does cast God Strength, especially at 2-star Sven, he can really carry fights, and with the nerf to Dragon Knight, in order for like dedicated Knights builds to be very strong, they're going to need both Sven and Dragon Knight really to carry that weight here. So I like this change. I think Sven's a cool unit that just never really got the credit he deserves, and now hopefully he will with this slight buff. All right, on to the item changes. Barricades. This is a fun contraption. Has been buff. Well, I don't know. It's been reworked slightly. So it has been moved up from tier 2 up to tier 3. So it's now a tier 3 item. It's going to be a little bit rare, a little bit later in the game. But you do get 3 barricades with it. Now, number of barricades increased from 2 to 3. Tiers changed 2 to 3. And I think this is really good because one of my big problems with barricades was not like what it did, but like the lack of control of the board that you had. It felt like it's too small because like if you try to lock somebody in a corner, well, somebody can still attack diagonally into it because people can attack melee diagonally, and so like they could very easily get past your barricades, it felt. So now getting 3 barricades, though, it makes a much more efficient way of walling off and controlling space on the battlefield, and in a way that I think is going to be very impactful. I'll have to like really see this and try to play with it more because I'd never really played with barricades too much, just enough to know that I didn't really like them. And now they also got an HP buff. They got increased from 600 to 750 HP. And yeah, this is a good change, I think. I really like this barricade rework, and I'm going to be much more inclined to pick it up as long as there's not like a really high tier item that I want to pick up over it. I think there's a lot of potential for this to kind of fulfill the goal that it was initially intended. It was initially intended to be this kind of space control or protection of your units, but with just 2, it just wasn't impactful enough to do that, and I think with 3, it'll have a much better shot of actually doing that. Blade Mail, bonus armor now shows. Okay, that's just a visual thing, nothing to worry about there. Claymore bonus attack damage has been slightly buffed from 33 up to from 30 to 33. Claymore, it still gets overshadowed by Gloves of Haste as a pure damage item, or like a damage output item, as soon as you get your unit up to 2-star in most cases. Claymore might have a touch more utility now on fast attack speed units like Weaver, but overall I'm not thrilled about picking up Claymore just because it does get outclassed by most units, or it gets outclassed by Gloves of Haste or attack speed items as soon as your unit hits 2-star. So I'm not thrilled about Claymore even after this buff, but it's fine, but it's not great. Desolator added a visual effects, nothing big there. Hand of Midas, percentage to gain gold on kill reduced from 30% down to 25%. Hand of Midas is still a great item. It was so good because it gave great attack speed, and the gold was just like a little cherry on top, and so now that cherry comes about 5% less often. I still want to play Hand of Midas in every case that I get it. I don't think this really kills the item by any means. It barely even takes down a tier, or like down a notch at all. This amount of gold is like maybe 1 gold difference over the course of a game. Maybe. I don't even think you get that much unless you have like a million kills on your units. It's not going to be that impactful. I still think Hand of Midas is a very high priority pick in a lot of cases. Horn of the Alpha, the Thunderhide that it summons, has been substantially buffed, up by about 15 damage on its attack damage, and its attack rate has increased ever so slightly, and its maximum health increased by quite a bit, by about 750. So all around, this item becomes a bit more appealing. I don't know if it's appealing enough. It felt so weak in its previous state. It just felt like the Thunderhide didn't do anything at all in like any circumstances. So I'm not terribly optimistic that this is going to be a suddenly high tier pick. Once you get to tier 5, I'm still liking things like Bloodthorn or Heart of Trask over this in tier 5, but it'll be interesting to see if they can buff this to a state where it is strong enough, although I'm not sure that it's there quite yet. Mechanism and Pipe of Insight here, rather. These two items have basically swapped tiers. Mechanism has gone up from tier 3 up to tier 4. Pipe of Insight has been changed from tier 4 down to tier 3. And this was a change that just makes so much sense because Mechanism was insanely powerful for a tier 3 item. I would pretty much never not take it other than if I really needed a Mask of Madness or I really needed like an Octarine Essence for a... if I really needed an Octarine Essence for like Bristleback. Other than that, I'm picking Mechanism in like every build every time. It's just so efficient. And it was so much strictly better than Pipe of Insight in a lot of cases just because the Pipe of Insight healed adjacent units for 400, but only against magic damage, and Mechanism heals basically everybody for 750. It was clear that Mechanism was just like a tier above Pipe of Insight. Pipe does give the holder some bonus magic resistance, so moving this down a tier maybe is a nerf to mages ever so slightly, but they kind of got buffed above with the change to Hobgen, so on the whole, I don't think that's that big of a deal for mages. Morbid Mask, lifesteal percentage has been increased. I still think this suffers from the same fundamental problem that it had before, in that any unit that wants lifesteal would much prefer to have an attack damage or attack speed item rather than the lifesteal item. Although I do suppose it's starting to creep up into a territory where it is pretty strong in its own right, even on like not dedicated damage dealers. A 30% lifesteal could be substantial on some other kind of like kind of off carry units rather than like your main damage dealer. Somebody like a Slarder could probably use it pretty well, or a Juggernaut even, rather than like the full carries like Legion Commanders or Troll Warlords or stuff like that, or Dragon Knights. Orb of Venom, the damage has been slightly increased from 30 up to 35. This item was kind of underperforming. I would pretty much never take it unless you were playing with Batrider for that interaction we talked about above. But now it's been slightly buffed. That's 5 more damage per second, so like essentially 15 damage per attack more. So I think this might be a substantial buff, but I still think this falls off towards the later stages of the game, and I'm pretty much going to be picking up other tier 2 items like Hand of Midas or the Stonehull items over Orb of Venom if I'm playing for the late game. Satanic, a slight buff here to bring it slightly more on par with Heart of Trask for like survivability. I still think it's behind Heart of Trask in most cases, so I'm not thrilled about Satanic unless it's like specifically on somebody like Troll Warlord or Legion Commander who's going to be doing a lot of auto attack damage, but in most cases I'm not thrilled about it compared to other tier 5 items. As an item on its own, it's pretty good. Tombstone, attack rate zombies, been buffed slightly. couldn't possibly care. Tombstone still seems like a garbage item. I mean, you're still going to play it the exact same way. The zombies just hit a touch harder now. I don't even feel like it's that big of a deal, though. I'm not very impressed with Tombstone, like, in any cases. It's a cool idea. It's just too weak for a tier 5 item. Like I said, there's other tier 5 items that just overperform these items even after these slight buffs. And finally, some alliance changes to Primordials, ever so slightly buffed up at tier 4, or 4 Eidolons rather. Their attack speed is increased and their armor is increased. I don't think it's enough to make 4 Primordials a build. I really don't. Even with this buff, 4 Primordials still seem weak. They still seem low impact. 6 Primordials was great, because you basically got to do even more, and they were so much more tanky, but they've been hit with repeated nerfs, and with the removal of like the good Primordials, like Arc Warden and Enigma, I don't think 4 Primordials is really where you want to be at all. And then finally down here, just some bug fixes related to spirits. Still, same deal as with Primordials. They don't feel like they're in a great spot, although fixing the AI to not target spiderlings, that makes them slightly better against insect opponents, but in general, the Delta Slam targeting algorithm is still very inconsistent, and intentionally so, but that's what really holds them back from being a very strong, consistent build, is just like a lack of the ability to do their very powerful Delta Slam. If they do get it off, it can be very potent, but in a lot of cases it feels very underwhelming. So I'm not thrilled about spirits at the moment. So relatively small, light touches on a lot of different things here. It really was quite a number of changes, but nothing that is like game breaking, that like needs to completely overhaul how you play. Just some small little tweaks that I think brings the meta into probably a little bit of a better spot. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and big thanks to all of my channel members who help make content like this possible. If you do like this kind of content, please do consider joining the channel. Click the little join button below. It really does help me out. Thank you so very much, and I will see you next time.